was thinking about, how do you get it incorporated? One of the competitions is, and I don't remember what they call it, but it's piano for congregational singing, and I think we just call that Sunday night, because that's what she does every Sunday night. But want to get those different songs involved as well. It's a blessing to see them use those or do those things at camp, but it is especially a blessing to see them then come home and use those in those talents that God's given them in their church. Appreciate that song this evening. James chapter 3, when you find your place, if you go ahead and stand. I feel like I should say this at the start. My wife, I didn't think I was. My wife, after Wednesday night, told me, "You're getting mean in your messages lately." That is not intentional. The problem was she told me that Wednesday night, and I knew the message that God was leading me to tonight, and I thought, boy, this one, actually in my brain had the potential to be mean. I'm going to try really hard not to be, and it's not my intention at all. So I think she is. She keeps me humble because she told me that, and then she prayed for me tonight that I would preach with a loving spirit. Not sure what exactly that's supposed to mean. So there we go. I don't know why I felt the need to tell you that, but if it comes across as mean, it is not my intention at all. But we're in this series in James right now, and came across this passage, and there are some things that this passage deals with the tongue. There are some things in this passage that I don't think you can preach without being pretty blunt about, and so we're gonna do that this evening. James chapter 3, starting in verse 1. My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. The tongue is a fire, and a world of iniquity, and so is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. That the fountains send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter. Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. Who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness and wisdom. We'll go ahead and stop there and have a word of prayer. Lord, I do want to thank you for the time that we can take in your word tonight, Lord, and that we can step aside from the things that the day-to-day. We can set aside from those aspects of our life and focus in on your word, Lord. And I do pray that you will help us during this time to not be distracted by things going on outside of this room, Lord, but focused on your word. Lord, I pray that you help me not to be distracted by things that may be going on, and help me be able to focus on the message that I believe you have for us this evening. Lord, I pray this in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. So I told you, the message is going to be on the tongue. I titled the message, The Power of the Tongue. I told my family this afternoon, while preparing for this, I wrote actually two different outlines on this same passage, both about the tongue. One of them I titled The Power of the Tongue. The other one, I titled it just Bite Your Tongue. So kind of I merged the two I don't know, while studying for this, it was different, because while studying for this message the last few weeks, I wrote two and then merged two, and this is what I believe God has for us this evening. I'm sure that everyone in here has heard the phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." How many of you realize that's a lie? Like, it's not true. I understand the sentiment behind it, that you get hit with a stick or a stone, a rock, and it will physically hurt. I fully get that. I was thinking about it while studying for this. One time, thankfully I can still remember this story. One time as a kid, we were at a preacher's meeting, and in the afternoon at preacher's meetings, there's a business meeting, and no pastor's kid enjoys sitting through the business meeting part. So typically what that means is all the pastor's kids get together outside and are just, goofing off while their dads are in there in the meeting. And so there was one that we were at, and my dad was in the meeting, and so Bo and I and a bunch of other pastor kids were outside, and I was in an area outside with some of the pastor's kids, and Bo and one of the other pastor's boys was over on the other side of the parking lot, and they decided that they should throw rocks as high as they could in the air and see how close they could get them to land to myself and the group of people that were around me. That was their great idea. And so the other boy decided he was going to go first, and he grabbed a rock and he threw it, and he got it pretty close. It landed right on top of my head. And I'm telling you, it split my head wide open, blood gushing out for the rest of the hour that the business meeting was going. We were in the basement of the church with bloody rags on my head, just hoping the bleeding would stop before our dads got out. It was funny. He kept on, the whole time, he's holding rags on my head. "Your dad is a big guy. He's not going to like this," just over and over again. So I understand that sticks and stones hurt. Okay, I understand the sentiment that, that's true, and that, and even the idea that I can choose to not let words bother me. And I do want to say that. How much words hurt you, words hurt regardless, but how much they hurt you, you do have somewhat of a choice in. You can choose to allow them to affect you, or you can choose not to. I could, with that rock hit me in the head, I could not choose to make the bleeding stop, but I can choose to let someone's words not cut me that deep. Here's the reality. Whether or not I choose to allow those words to cut me deep or not, they still do cut. Words still do hurt, which we need to be aware of. We need to be very aware of the fact that the words that come out of your mouth have an effect on someone else, that they affect people. Verse 2, it talks about, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man." Because the words we say, the things that come out of our mouth, they affect people. You may think, well, I'm just saying how I feel, or you may think that the things that you're saying are okay, or sometimes we even get the mindset, well, they just need to toughen up. I should be able to speak my mind, and they should just be able to toughen up and handle it, or they just need to learn how to take it. But you better watch your words, because those affect someone. In studying for this, I was reading a few things. You know what the number one reason given by young people for why they consider suicide? The number one reason, according to this study that I read at least, the number one reason given by either someone who has committed suicide or someone who has considered it was bullying, not physical, emotional. That someone's words have affected them. Our words affect people, and I can see someone saying, well, yes, but, my words can't do that. Let's hold on here, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. If we can agree that words affect people, then you have to see that if your words are not positive words and constantly negative and tearing down and bringing that person down, they're affecting them. You may not drive someone to something that drastic, but you would be shocked the number of people who are out of the ministry because of the words of others. There are a shocking number of pastors that I know who are no longer in the ministry because either they or their wife or their kids could no longer handle the words of other people. because they affect people. We don't think about that. We think, well, it's fine. It's just how I feel, or it's just what I'm thinking. They affect people. And honestly, you would be shocked the number of people who stop attending church members who stop coming. And when, we visit them to try to kind of bring them back, and the reason that they give was the word said to them. Now, there's power in your tongue. And I want you to catch this before we get started this evening. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Power and strength are not always bad things unless they're used for bad. Having a strong military is not a bad thing. Our nation has been known as a major military superpower for a lot of years, and that hasn't been a bad thing. Because of it, we've been known, sometimes to our own detriment, but we've been known to use that strength and that power to help others. We've been known to help when a larger country attacks and does some injustice, that we come alongside and we have aided maybe some of our allies or others. And I'm sure that our enemies have seen our strength and power as a negative, but power doesn't have to be a bad thing unless we started using our military strength for bad. And we can see examples of countries that have done that over the years. Think of a country like Germany. They were a nation with a strong military force. They were also a nation that was led by greed and corruption and used that force for evil. A lot of innocent people died, and a world war caused because of their strength being used for bad. Strength and power in and of itself are not bad unless they're used for bad. The fact that your tongue and that your words and the things that you say hold a lot of power is not a bad thing unless you choose to use it for that. So with that said tonight, I want to look at the power of the tongue. I have three things that I want us to see tonight out of this passage. The first is simply this, and this first point, you know how I said it could be mean. First point is where that could be. Second and third point are nice. We'll be good. We just have to get through point number one. The tongue used wrong. Look at verse 5 and 6. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. I've already given some examples of the tongue used wrong, kind of in generic terms. Let me give you an example here. I was thinking of Paul before he became Paul. Paul is a man that after he got saved was mentioned this morning. He is known for his missionary work. He is one that, as was said, a lot of pastors, a lot of missionaries try to model their life and their ministry after. He's known for his traveling all sorts of areas that had no other possibility even to hear the gospel. He's going to a people group who had never heard before, and quite frankly, who to that point no one else would go to. Now, the words that he said after he came to Christ, the words he said, changed lives. The Bible doesn't tell us how many souls were saved under the ministry of Paul, because I don't think numbers are as important to God as they are to us in that way. We tend to measure success in numbers, and I don't think God does. But whatever that number was that got saved, it was a lot. I mean, churches started and preachers sent out. God used his tongue, and it affected people. But that same tongue, before God got a hold of him, was breathing out threatenings and slaughter. I mean, that's the same tongue. The same tongue that we know of, that as was said this morning, penned much of our Bible. The same tongue that reached countless for Christ. The same tongue that preached in all sorts of areas and started these churches and trained preachers before God got a hold of them, was breathing out threatenings and slaughter. It was a tongue used wrong. In this passage, Paul tells us a few things about the tongue used wrong in verses 5 and 6. The tongue is a fire. I feel like I keep kind of saying this, but in different words. Fire in itself is not a bad thing. I mean, in fact, there are plenty of examples and instances you could give that fire has saved lives. A person perhaps is lost, and rescue crews can't, they're searching for them and they can't find them, whatever, the terrain is too dense, or they can't find them for whatever reason, so that person will start a fire, and crews can see the smoke from that fire and follow the smoke and find them and rescue them. Or a person has gotten cold and wet and are perhaps on the verge of hypothermia, and a fire is started, and the heat produced from that fire may be the only thing that keeps them warm enough to survive. I've had a couple of times camping that you get cold and wet enough, and there is nothing better to help you get through than a fire. Years ago, I went up backcountry hunting with a guy, and we got up in the mountains, and when we went up, it was 75 degrees and sunshine. I hiked up the area we were going to in summer gear because it was 75 degrees and sunshine. We set up camp and we hunted the first day, went to bed, and woke up with over a foot of snow outside. We didn't realize it was coming, but a blizzard had rolled in, and our stuff now was all covered in snow and soaked. It was cold, it was wet, it was nasty. So cold that a deer walked in our camp and my rifle wouldn't shoot because the bolt was frozen. I mean, it was cold. It was miserable. Hey, we started a fire that morning to survive. I mean, fire can be a good thing as long as it's contained. I hunted that same area the next season, and we had to leave early because of a forest fire. Same time of year, exactly the same area. When we went up, we knew that there was a fire in the area when we hiked in there, but we also knew that it was over 10 miles away, and crews were working on it. But that fire couldn't be contained, and it grew and grew fast enough that we were informed, you have to leave. Because a fire that is not contained causes destruction. Fire in and of itself is not bad, but a fire that is not contained grows out of control. That's what's being said in this passage. A tongue that is not contained causes destruction. Destruction that you may not even see, that you may not even realize happens. You think about forest fires and the massive destruction that they cause. I don't know if you ever have either hiked through or driven through an area where there has been a recent forest fire, or a forest fire even within 2-3 years. I mean, the destruction that it causes is amazing. Again, that area is one that I have been to a few times, so I know what it looks like when it's growing normal, and I knew what it looked like after a fire. The destruction that they cause, but they're often started by the tiniest little spark. They're started by this little thing. The person who caused that spark probably never sees the harm and destruction that they caused. Majority of the time, and I want to say it that way, majority of the time, they didn't even mean for it to happen. They never see the destruction and the pain caused, the loss caused, and they didn't mean for this. Often we don't mean for our tongue to cause the damage that it does. We may not even see the pain that it causes, but it's a fire. And that little thing that you said grows and causes destruction that you never imagined. The tongue used wrong is a fire. The passage tells us tongue used wrong is iniquity. Again, found in verse 6. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. Not just is it iniquity, it is a world of iniquity. Now, I have to be careful to not get ahead of my kind of next sub-point here, because these two kind of go very closely together. Iniquity, a super simple definition of it, is immorality. The tongue used wrong speaks things that are iniquity, that are immoral. Anyone who's been in wherever, public school building or a workplace or watched TV lately or gone to a grocery store, know that to be true. It's shocking how much immorality rolls off of people's tongues. Lisa's stepmom is a school bus driver, and sometimes she'll get talking about her work and some of the routes she drives, and has a few times now told us about about driving routes for, I can't remember if it's preschool or kindergarten, but little guys. I mean, you're talking little guys. And the things that she says they are saying on her bus are vile. I mean, little guy. You're not talking seniors in high school. It's wrong for them to say it. But you're talking little, and the things that are coming out of their mouth is vile, because the tongue used wrong is iniquity. When the tongue is used wrong, passage tells us that it defiles. Passage says that it defiles the whole body. I'm sure most of you have heard this idea that it takes a lifetime to build a testimony and a moment to destroy it. You can spend your entire life trying to build a testimony for God and trying to live right and trying to do all of the things that you're supposed to do. But it only takes one moment of opening your mouth and filth coming out to completely destroy all of that. Because used wrong, your tongue defiles you. When the tongue is used wrong, the tongue tears down. Now, I want to be cautious how I say this to say it right. We need to be very aware of the things that we say to and about another person. We need to be very cautious and very aware of the things that we say to and about another person, because a tongue used wrong tears down. I don't know how to say this other than just saying it. I don't tend to be one who beats around the bush, but so here it is. Gossip runs rampant in our quote-unquote Christian circles. It does. It's just a reality. And we try to justify it. We try to, claim that, I'm not gossiping. I've heard people's excuses for how they're justifying theirs. I'm not gossiping. I care. And I thought this person needed to know, or whatever, goofy way that a person tries to justify the fact that they are gossiping. I even once heard someone say that they know it's wrong, but it's just who I am. Well, it might be who the old man is, but it sure isn't who you should be. Let's just keep being blunt here. It is a sin and tears people down. If you're involved in it, stop. No. That is a tongue used wrong, and that little spark you started is going to turn into a forest fire in some poor person's life that you never imagined. You never imagined. Again, growing up in a pastor's home and then being a pastor myself, so hearing my dad counseling with people, hearing of stories of that, and then myself doing so, you would not believe the number of people who are no longer in church because, that person started this rumor about me. This thing was said about me, and I don't feel like I can show my face there again because someone gossiped. Verse 10 says it, these things ought not to be so. Tongue used wrong. So, that point, I told you, that point was a little harsh. Let's move on to number 2. Tongue used wrong, number 2. The tongue used right. Look at verse 9 and 10. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. I already used the example of the fire a few times. I'm going to kind of use that a little bit throughout the message, more I believe in a minute, but that a fire used correctly can save lives. The chapter that we started with in verse 3, it also compares the tongue to a few things. It compares the tongue to a horse's bridle. It also compares it to the helm of a ship. That is a little thing. But this little thing can control a massive ship against the winds. When you think of the size of ships, of whatever it is, whether it's barges or ocean liners, those sorts of things, they are massive. It was either last summer or the summer before. Lisa and I went kayaking down off of Ruston, And down there, there's those, I don't know if they're military or what they are. They're big gray barges that are always parked there, and then they load them up there. So we're, kayaking around down by there. When you are on a 12-foot kayak on the water next to those things, looking up at them, you realize just how huge they are and how tiny you are. Especially because at some point while we were kayaking around them, they fired up the engines. I think it was just like a test run thing, but all of a sudden you start seeing that thing spin underneath there, and that's even more intimidating. Whoa, there's something happening, and I'm little bitty. Oh, they are absolutely massive, but they are controlled by a relatively small thing. Now, you start to think about the storms that those ships could potentially face. I mean, out in the ocean with gale force winds and massive waves that are large enough and strong enough to toss that giant ship around. And yet, despite that, through the winds and through the waves, the captain can maintain control of the ship with a tiny little wheel. When used for good, it can do some great things. The tongue, used for good, proclaims Christ. Notice it says a tongue that is used for Christ is not talking about others. A tongue that is used for Christ is not talking about self. It proclaims Christ. It really kind of ties in with Pastor's message this morning, because that's what our world needs. It doesn't need you and I bringing focus and attention to self. It doesn't need you and I talking about our achievements or about our abilities. What it needs is for us to proclaim Christ. It needs to hear the gospel. And that's exactly what the tongue used right does. It tells others about the Savior. It proclaims Christ. The tongue used right blesses God. We see that in verse 9. Therewith bless we God, even the Father. Listen, I don't want to take super long with this, but we could park here all night if we wanted. And I don't, while I don't want to take super long with it, I don't believe it would be right just to move on without spending at least a few minutes here. God has blessed us in so many ways. I've said this often, God has blessed us so much that it's very often we don't even see it anymore. We're sort of like that spoiled child that's always been given everything they want, so they reach a point that they no longer see it as a privilege. They just expect, well, I've always gotten what I wanted, so the minute I want it, I should have it. And we kind of get that way with God, don't we? Well, God's been so good to us that we stop even seeing that it's because God's good to us. And we just expect, well, it's always going to be this way. God has so overly abundantly blessed us. I thought about, trying to give examples. I don't think that I could without doing it injustice. I mean, if you just take a few minutes later and think of the ways that God has blessed you. We've started in our home. My wife actually had this idea, and we've been doing this, I don't know, for the last probably close to a month at this point. That she got a notepad, and every day each one of the five of us writes something on there that we are thankful for that day. And we laugh about it sometimes, because sometimes, it can be big things. Sometimes it's little things. Sometimes it's goofy things. It doesn't matter. Again, sometimes we look at it and we think, oh, well, that's kind of a silly thing. But they are things that we are thankful for and that God has blessed us with. Here's what that does. It causes, and I'm not saying, everyone needs to go buy a notepad. But here's what it does. It causes us to see some of those things that we might have missed otherwise. Because it gets really easy to overlook all those things. And when you're staring at a notepad going, oh man, it's Friday, I got to write something for Friday, what is something that, it's pretty often that you think of things that you wouldn't normally say, oh, well, that's a blessing. But then when you write it down, you're like, oh, wow, that is. It just causes you to kind of stop and think a little bit. Because pretty often we ignore it. Follow me here. If God is blessing me that much, if God is blessing me so much that I have become like a spoiled child who doesn't even see that I'm spoiled, it only makes sense that I show appreciation for that with my mouth. Not only makes sense that a tongue used right shows thanks to God, it only makes sense that a tongue used correctly shows thanks to God for all that he has done, because he has done so much. A tongue used right proclaims Christ. A tongue used right blesses Christ. A tongue used right builds up others. Look at verse 9 and 10. Therewith bless we God, even the Father. Therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Talks about the same mouth giving blessings and cursings, and it ought not to be so. I'm just gonna kind of, I guess, breeze through this because I preached on a similar concept a few weeks ago, but listen quickly and we'll keep moving. Rather than your tongue tearing down, it should be used to build up. Again, I think it was a Wednesday night a couple of weeks ago that I preached a message on this idea. The world does enough tearing down of Christians. I mean, this world does enough to make you feel like you are lower than dirt, and does enough to make you feel like you are a mess. Now, we need some Christians who will take the time to build each other up, to help each other grow. And I can see someone saying, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to give you a super simple way here. And an example that it's a personal example happened for me this week. I had a day that I'm human too. It was a day that I was struggling. It had been a really rough day, and by the end of the day, it was one of those days, by the end of the day, I just got home and it was like, I'm done. I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I'm not a happy camper. And suddenly got a text from a friend of mine. He had no idea what was going on in my day. He didn't know what had gone on. He didn't know what had happened. He just sent me a text saying, hey, I want you to know I'm praying for you right now, and if you ever need to talk, my phone's on. Listen, I was down, and it immediately built me back up. You don't need to know, and this is where we often struggle with this, and we turn it into gossip. You don't need to know what's going on in someone else's life and get your nose in their business. Just encourage them by letting them know you're praying for them. That's all it takes. So I don't have to know what's going on in Brother Jance's life, but I can still try and be an encouragement to Brother Jance. Builds up others. Power of the tongue. So far we've seen the tongue used wrong, the tongue used right, and then the third thing I want us to see this evening is the tongue controlled. I think that it makes sense to look at. If we can see the harm that our tongue causes when, as I said earlier, when it's not controlled, the lives that can be hurt and the people that can be torn down, and we can see even the hurt that it can do in our own lives, wrecking our testimony, and then we can see the good that it can do in proclaiming the gospel and blessing God for his many blessings and building up others when they've been torn down. Then it makes sense, if I can see those things, that you and I would want to then know, well, how do I control this thing? You ready? You can't. Verse 8, but the tongue can no man tame. It's interesting, the passage, verse 7, like he names for every kind of beast and of bird and of serpent and of things in the sea is tamed and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil and full of deadly poison. It's pretty clear, isn't it? A little discouraging even. Boy, the tongue, the dangers of the tongue if it's unbridled, and the dangers of the tongue if it's not controlled. Mankind has tamed every beast out there. Your tongue? Nope. Can't do it. The tongue can no man tame. Follow me here. In your flesh, you can't. Because no matter how strong you are, no matter how good you are at biting your tongue, eventually your tongue is your tongue and is going to say something. We all know that's true. We've all had those times that's like, boy, I am biting my tongue because I'm going to try not to say something. You can only bite your tongue so long before something comes out. The guys that I work with, they know that I'm a pastor, and I've told them. So I didn't ask them not to talk certain ways around me, but they know I'm a pastor, so they try to watch what they say around me, and I'm pretty big on profanity doesn't belong in the workplace anyways, so that helps, and they try to watch their mouth, but no matter the guy, they are unsaved guys, and at some point who they are comes out, because we are human, and the tongue can no man tame. It is only tamed by Christ. You notice the passage says the tongue can no man tame. I used the example of Saul/Paul earlier in the message. What made the difference in Paul that he went from breathing out threatenings and slaughter to preaching the gospel? Was it that Paul decided to turn over a new leaf and change the type of words he used? Was it that he decided, well, I sound too mean when I breathe out threatenings and slaughter, and people don't seem to like me. It's hard to make friends when you're breathing out slaughter all the time, so I'm gonna tone down my mouth. No, was it that Paul decided that he just needed a better filter? No, the change happened when he met Christ and gave Christ control of his life, and that included his mouth. That's my point. You're not going to control your mouth on your own. You're going to have to give it to God. You're going to have to give him control. You have a problem using your tongue wrong? Give it to God. Do you see in your own life that you're hurting your own testimony with your tongue? Give your tongue to God. Do you see that in your own life you're tearing people down with your tongue? Give it to God. Do you desire to use your tongue right? Use that fire for heat rather than damage? Give your tongue to God. Give him control. Conclusion this evening, and I'll be done. Your tongue is a powerful thing that can either do a bunch of harm or a bunch of good. And I believe that there are a lot of Christians who are genuinely trying to control their tongue. They're just doing it in their own strength. And just, quite frankly, they're failing. If you want to control, if you want your tongue to be used for the glory of God rather than the detriment of his cause, stop trying to control it yourself and ask God to control it for you. Here's really what this comes down to. We say we surrender to God. Often you'll hear, phrases like, I surrender my life, or those sorts of things. But we tend to compartmentalize. So we surrender, but we only surrender certain areas, and then we hold on to other areas. When I was a teen, I don't remember who preached it. I don't remember anything else about the message. But I remember one of the messages preached, the guy compared it to, we give God our heart, but we often keep one little luminant locked. That's mine. We keep ours because we compartmentalize. God, I surrender, and I'm giving you most, but I'm holding these areas, or I'm going to control these areas, or I want to do. This is one of those areas that often we decide, well, I can control the things I say. We compartmentalize it to well, it's I'll just maintain control of this one. Surrender your tongue to God. Think of the song. I think of this song often, honestly, is I surrender all, because it sounds so simple, and we all know it, and we all sing it, but it is so challenging. Your tongue, it's part of that all. You want to control your tongue so that it is used for good, so that it is used to proclaim Christ and to bless Christ and to build up others, rather than to tear down and to destroy and to cause problems. Then give that tongue to God. Let's pray. Lord, I do want to thank you, Lord, for the fact that we can give it to you. or if the message ended with "the tongue can no man tame," that would be a pretty discouraging thing. It'd be a pretty discouraging thing to see, boy, the damage that my tongue can cause and the problems that it can do, and I want to use it for right, but I just can't. We can't. We can give it to you, and you can. Lord, I pray that you'll help those of us in here to decide I am going to give control of my tongue to God. Lord, help us to decide I'm not going to use my tongue for wrong anymore. I don't want to use it for those wrong things, that fire that winds up causing destruction either in someone else's life or my own. I don't want to use it to tear people down. I don't want to use it in those wrong ways. I want to use my tongue to proclaim Christ. I want to use my tongue to bring glory and honor to Him. I want to use my tongue to build up believers. And I can't do that on my own. Lord, help us tonight to decide to give it to you. I pray this in your name.
So stand. Boy, what a challenge this evening to surrender all